So the great government shutdown of 2013 is over. Oh wait, I mean the partial shutdown, or the sort of shutdown, or rather, the great inconvenience. Yes, let us take a minute to examine what exactly was shut down. Not the banking system, not the central bank, not the war machine, not the military-industrial complex, not any of the security apparatus of the state. No, just the stuff that inconveniences poor people and the productive people that might compete with American government's corporate interest sponsors. And we heard the stories, and I read the news like everybody else here, and if anything, I read more because I'm in jail and I get to see the greatest propaganda that the New York Times and the Washington Post can put out. But even they were able to show some of the struggles faced by the American people, if not able to fully draw the right conclusions or the lessons that should be learned from this recent episode of great national embarrassment. And I just should point out, before I get to these particulars, that of all the doomsday prophesizing that has gone on around what would happen if the American government defaulted on its loans, and the way this is talked about in the press, remember, what if America defaults? What shame for America? No. The government is not the same as the nation, is not the same as the people. But the mainstream media language that they use to describe this wouldn't allow you to see the difference if they had their way. But it's okay. The audience of the mainstream media is not as dumb as they think it is. And for all these stories of fear-mongering, what if America defaults? There's going to be turmoil around the world. Everybody's going to be effective. It's going to be destructive. And, oh my gosh, that's not to say that there wouldn't be consequences for real people, but if the government stops giving money to really, really rich people, we're all supposed to freak out and act like that's a bad thing. We're all supposed to say, well, please, Mr. Politician, save us. Please keep the government running. Please keep paying off the rich people at the expense of the poor people, because we don't want to hear about economic calamities. We don't want to see people losing money in the stock market. We don't want to stop this trend of the rich getting richer while the poor get poor. And so some of the stories we heard, a lot of them centered around the national parks. And there should be some really obvious lessons to be taken out of this, because lots of local economies were adversely affected, but businesses were shut down. People who run roadside stands, all of the various auxiliary businesses, people who run restaurants on national parklands, things like that, all of their businesses just shut down because some words exchanged between politicians who don't give a crap about them in some far-off capital. Do we really need them? And among all of these stories, we saw some glimmers of hope that there were places where the state governments were going to step in and fund the operations of these national parks. But why stop at that? If we don't have to wait for the federal government to fund the operating of these national parks to make sure that those crazy American citizens don't leave trash laying around or destroy things, and in fact, we had the case of Mr. Cleanup in Washington, D.C., who went around when the National Park Service was slacking air and decided he was just going to mow the lawns and rake the leaves and take out the garbage himself. So why wouldn't you have state governments, instead of just saying, okay, we'll pay for your federal government services, we'll pay to keep these parks open, why not just reclaim the property for the states and cut out the middleman? And of course there was the story of the gentleman who was getting to open his rum brewing operation and his distillery, and couldn't because the Treasury Department was shut down, or at least the office where they issue the licenses for all new alcoholic products. There were crab fishers in Alaska who couldn't go out and do their business because somebody in an office couldn't put their seal of approval on a piece of paper. All of these businesses adversely affected, and of course, there was the story of the memorials in Washington, D.C., and the World War II veterans who came in and removed the barriers and piled them up at the White House. Of all misguided attempts at placing blame, it's almost sad to see fellow veterans not realizing that they're groveling still, essentially, at the feet of those who still don't give a crap about them, who would send more men to continue to die in rich men's wars. But the lesson to be learned, it was still a beautiful, powerful act of defiance. Okay, you're not going to let us mourn at these monuments of that you set up as places for us to mourn a fallen comrades. We're going to take down those barriers. Screw you. We are going to engage in this important civil disobedience, and we are going to claim these as monuments for the people. But how do we apply that lesson to the bigger picture here? Why not remove all of the barriers? Why not say, you know what? It's not enough that you're not funding the office to license me to brew and distill my rum, or to go out and fish for crabs. Why not just remove all the barriers? What is the enforcement mechanism? Just think about this for a second. Why is it that you can't engage in normal, peaceful business activities without a license from the government? Because if you do, men with guns will come and shut down your operation and steal your property and lock you in a cage. And we put up with this to the point where if a government partial shutdown stops some offices from issuing licenses, the economy is so adversely affected. What do? We just stand here and twiddle our thumbs and go, oh, I couldn't get a piece of paper that said I'm allowed to do my business. I guess I'm just going to have to not do my business. I'm just going to have to wait for the people in Washington to figure this out so they can give me permission to do what I got to do. Now, for the individual business owner, yes, I cannot fault you when you're facing down the police state and no-knock raids and them sending SWAT teams after people for violating such silly provisions as we're talking about here. But to the bigger picture, will the American people wake up to the fact that we have become like someone suffering from battered spouse syndrome? And the government now, they expect us every time to come crawling back to them, to be begging for forgiveness, to be grateful that they opened up the government, to be grateful that they're issuing us permits and licenses again, that they're letting us walk around the woods, because, you know, if it wasn't for government, I don't know how people would be able to ever go for a hike in safety. Oh my gosh. You have to wonder, what's really behind this? You hear the headlines now about what terrible strategy this was for the GOP, for the Republican Party, that they have lost so much stature, like as if they had that much respect from the American people before. Not that the Democrats really should have been any better. But was there someone that wanted to sacrifice the Republican Party as the loyal resistance? To have a calculated whiplash effect for big government? That the American people would be so gullible as to say, oh my gosh, it's those small government Tea Party types that are responsible. We need big government Democrats to make us more dependent on a strong central authority. And for once, I'm going to have to say, it's almost embarrassing to admit that I'm in agreement with Senator Lindsey Graham, that poor guy who was abused in various ways as a child, and what we can only surmise is the only cause of his awkward political angst and aggressiveness and willingness to shed blood on behalf of government. But he pointed out that the Republican Party should have let the spotlight just hang on Obamacare. And there's still plenty of time for that. But of course, this was a missed opportunity, because if it wasn't for the shutdown, the headlines of the last 2 or 3 weeks would have been about what a failure the rollout of Obamacare was. And the, at least, mainstream narrative for the unthinking masses might have gone the other way. Geez, the more central government we have, the worse off we are. But I think to anybody who takes a moment to actually consider what has happened, the only logical conclusion is that we shouldn't be dependent on such a central authority that is so corrupt and unreliable, not because this particular central government is corrupt and unreliable, but because it's inherent in the course of democracies, of democratic republics, of empire, that we come to this point in time. And it seems like, as Obama has pointed out, they are governing from crisis to crisis. And I think they're going to use this as an excuse. This is going to be what they're going to blame Obamacare's failure on. Oh, it was the Republicans resisting it and making it harder for us to implement this wonderful system. But I think there was another big miscalculation by the powers that be. I don't think the American people are this dumb. I don't think they're this gullible. I don't think we're going to be the battered spouse any longer. I think America's self-esteem is going to recover at some point. We can be a great nation again without the federal government, without collectivism. And as we enter this twilight phase of the American empire, and we see the powers that be struggling in desperation, trying to make us dependent, making us feel battered and incapable of standing up on our own without the great authority, parental figure that government tries to be, we will be a great nation again if we simply remember liberty. Before I get to these particulars, that of all the doomsday prophesizing that has gone on around what would happen if the American government defaulted on its own, and the way this is talked about in the press, remember, what if America defaults? What shame for America? No. The government is not the same as the nation, is not the same as the people. But the mainstream mill, and I get to see the greatest propaganda that the New York Times and the Washington Post can put out, but even they were able to show some of the struggles faced by the American people. It's not able to fully draw the right conclusions or the lessons that should be learned from this recent episode of great national embarrassment. And I just should point out media language that they use to describe this wouldn't allow you to see the difference if they had their way, but it's okay. The audience of the mainstream media is not as dumb as they think it is. And for all these stories of fear-mongering, what if America defaults? There's going to be turmoil around the world. Everybody's going to be effective. It's going to be destructive. And war machine, not the military-industrial complex, not any of the security apparatus of the state. No, just the stuff that inconveniences poor people and the productive people that might compete with American government's corporate interest sponsors. And we heard the stories, and I read the news like everybody else here, and if anything, I read more because I'm in jail. So the great government shutdown of 2013 is over. Oh wait, I mean the partial shutdown, or the sort of shutdown, or rather, the great inconvenience. Yes, let us take a minute to examine what exactly was shut down. Not the banking system, not the central bank, not the